Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Don Acopro. I'm a consultant neurologist and I'm a low carbohydrate health advocate. So you can also reach me through my website, the lowcarbneurologist.com or the lowcarbhealthmd.com, and also everywhere in social media using my handle at lowcarbhealthmd. So welcome to this session for the International Low Carb Awareness Week for 2023. Our highly esteemed guest for this session is Dr. Gary Petke. For most people who are already into the low carb nutrition space, I suppose Gary needs no further introduction. For those of you who may not have encountered him yet, Dr. Gary Fettke is an orthopedic surgeon and he's based in Launceston, Tasmania, Australia. He places significant emphasis on preventive medicine within his practice. And despite his specialization in surgery, Gary advocates for proactively addressing health issues, particularly by encouraging weight loss before resorting to surgical interventions, especially for diabetic patients who needs to have their legs amputated. So he strongly believes that preventive measures are very effective and are often centered around dietary modifications. And thus, Gary has been a staunch supporter of the low carbohydrate, healthy fats lifestyle for so long, especially for its positive impact on health. Gary himself has personally battled weight issues, and various health concerns in the past, and underwent a transformative journey by altering his diet and lifestyle. He has also been concerned about the aging population and how it strains our current health systems, and views the current trajectory as unsustainable and a potential collision in the evolution of healthcare. In recent years, Gary has directed his attention towards understanding the link between diet and the development of conditions such as diabetes, obesity, and cancer. And he has gained international recognition for his advocacy against the combined impact of sugar, fructose, refined carbohydrates, and polyunsaturated oils, attributing them to inflammation and the rise of modern diseases. And despite facing backlash from regulatory bodies, including the AHPRA in Australia, for his public health stance, Dr. Gary Fettke and his wife Belinda remain actively involved in promoting the benefits of a low-carb, healthy fat lifestyle. Their ongoing efforts have revealed vested interests and ideologies influencing nutritional guidelines on a global scale. Dr. Fettke remains dedicated to unraveling the central role of nutrition, not only in health, but also in shaping education, environmental impact, economics, politics, and belief systems worldwide. Hello, Gary. As always, it is an honor talking to you. And would you like to say a little something to our audience before?
Good to see you again, Dr. Don.
Yeah, for this session on global diet guidelines.
I think you've summed up what we're trying to do, but we're trying to do everything on a global scale pretty well. And we're just part, we're cogs in a wheel, and yourself included, and everyone who's attending the conference is actually part of the cogs in the wheel of trying to change or shift us back to better metabolic health, because that's the long and the short of it is, and I think you've mentioned the word unsustainable. The current health or sickness of society is unsustainable. It's at a personal level, at a family level, community, economic, country level, and internationally. So whatever trajectory we're on at the moment isn't working. And rather than just complaining about it, I've always been solution-based. Maybe that's the surgeon in me. Don't complain to me about a problem, come to me with a solution. And this whole journey that I've been on, that we've all been on, the move away from the food pyramid, the food plate, everything we've been taught and educated, literally what I call propaganda has been literally shoved down our throats. And guess what? We've gotten fatter and sicker. So, a return back to healthy eating is the very first step in turning it all around. And here's we pay more attention to what petrol we put in our cars than we put in our bodies. And that's all I'm saying is, how about we pay more attention to what we put in our bodies and come back to the basics, and you'll improve your health.
That's right. What we would like to hear from you in particular is like, for the past several years, we have been taught that, the dietary guidelines, especially that developed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture for so long, it's been popularly called the dietary pyramid, and it has been duplicated several times worldwide. And now they're most recently marketing it as the My Plate. So that also involves many dietitians and nutritionists worldwide, especially through their societies in their respective countries. And they have also basically adopted the same thing to their own guidelines that essentially is just we would say, a mirror image of the USDA recommendations. Can you help shed some light as to the real origins of this guideline that has been responsible for, the US called the standard American diet? Yeah.
Well, it's a sad diet, really. It's I've got a favorite term where I say, if you want to eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid, and along the way, you're going to look like the food pyramid. And I think that pretty well sums up the food pyramid. So if we come, Belinda and myself are talking less and less about the science of low carb, healthy fat, keto, because I think that's basic. My talks are on YouTube about that, inflammation, nutritional model of inflammation, the central role of nutrition, everything about carbohydrates, because that's just basic biochemistry. That's what our medical degrees are based on. That's what everyone's science degrees should be based on, is biochemistry. And so when we get down and discuss the Krebs cycle, I often refer back to that, which is pretty well the source of turning. It's the cycle within the body, within all living creatures, which turns fuel, whether or not it's protein, fat, or carbohydrate, into adenosine triphosphate, ATP. It's the energy of our bodies. It's the energy of life. And very simply, to sum up biochemistry, all three of those, proteins, fats, and carbohydrate, can be used for energy. And our bodies require essential proteins, they require essential healthy fats, and they require no carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are a luxury item for our biochemistry, and they're a luxury item in nature. And in nature, when you get seasonal fruits, which is pretty well the only natural source that you can eat, they're there to fatten us up for winter hibernation. So that's pretty well biochemistry. We need essential fats, we need essential proteins, we need them to be across the board. That means it's got to be pretty well an animal-based components to it. Plant-based proteins, plant-based fats are incomplete, and there are no essential carbohydrates. So that's pretty well the biochemistry. And I know you've got lots of other speakers this weekend that are going to come to that, but I'm keeping it simple. So my situation is, the more I notice the benefits for myself and my patients by doing that basic biochemistry, moving away from carbohydrate and getting healthy fats and healthy proteins pretty well from animal-based source, everyone's health was improving, but the system didn't like me talking about it. So I was reported to the medical board on 3 occasions by dietitians. We're able to track down the processed food industry, particularly the cereal industry, ultimately. And even pharmaceutical industry has had a role to play in that. Now, it's because we have the ability with low carb to actually turn around people's health without drugs, without highly ultra-processed food. So our journey, first of all, was about the science, but the more trouble I got into talking about the science and the benefits, it was very clear to us that something is stopping that message. And so Belinda's work in helping clear my name, or in pretty well clearing my name, was that she's identified so many vested interests around the world So I'm very happy for people to have their opinion, but I'd like to know where you got your opinion from or how you formulated it. So as you talk about the food pyramid, now called My Food Plate, it all started in the United States. So that whole concept of what we should eat was started really pretty well at the turn of the 20th century, 1927 actually. And so if we consider that, because we all tended to evolve for a couple of million years without being told what to eat. You know, our great ancestors, our cavemen, I do believe in evolution. So we had an evolutionary, we evolved by eating an evolutionary diet. And that diet just, we never had, food guidelines. We didn't have a committee telling us what to eat. So the moment we've got government involved and we've got industry involved, we then start realizing, okay, this is about politics and money and a surprisingly significant amount about religion rather than actually about science. So a lot of people talk about the McGovern report and the development of the first United States dietary guidelines in the 1960s and early 1970s, because it took a long time to actually put that together. But that was significantly influenced by, it wasn't actually didn't come away from the medical system, and it came from the food and agricultural system, boards in the US. And so therefore, this was actually developed by the food manufacturing, food production industry, not for its health benefits, but what they thought was probably the best way to go. So, but strangely enough, the story goes back a lot further, because you've got to see what influences have actually been changing the education of us as healthcare professionals for over 100 years. So if we see that there were multiple players, but particularly the food industry and religious organizations involved in shaping that food pyramid 50 years ago now. But if you go back 100 years ago, we start with the formation of the American Dietetics Association. So therefore, the model of the American Dietetics Association was repeated over and over. And so it became the model for the British Dietetics Association, for the Canadian, the South African, the Australian, the New Zealand, and ultimately that food pyramid, the food concept, the food guidelines went right around the world, including to the Philippines. I mean, you've got a significant American influence. And, when it comes down to guidelines. And so a lot of countries, including Australia, pretty well rubber stamped the United States dietary guidelines, and they have done for decades and decades and decades. So our first port of call isn't the food pyramid, is not the McGovern report. The first port of call is actually October 19, I think I said 27, it's 1923 actually, with the formation of the American Dietetics Association. So two things in relationship to that. Well, three. First of all, the woman who wanted to start it was a woman by the name of Lena Cooper. Lena Cooper went on to write the textbooks for the next 30 to 40 years, which became the backbone of dietetics education around the world at the beginning. She was the first dietitian to work for the US Department of Defense. So she was involved in developing the food guidelines of what the military was supposed to eat. What Lena Cooper, her claim to fame, and in retrospect, is she was working for the family, working for John Harvey Kellogg and the cereal industry at that point in time. So she was born out of the cereal industry. And she had the beliefs of John Harvey Kellogg and the wider Seventh-day Adventist church organization. I know that treads on a few toes when we start talking about this, but everything I'm stating is factual and has been acknowledged by many people, including senior members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they've even written articles about that. In 2019, there was an article in a journal called Religion called the role of the Adventist Church in shaping dietary guidelines, or along that line, but they effectively published everything that I'm talking about, and in their references is Belinda's work. So they actually acknowledge that she's actually an expert in this, and they're quite proud of wanting to change the diet of the world. The only problem is that the Seventh-day Adventists' beliefs are not based on science, they're based on religious ideology. And Ellen G. White, who was the prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, her teachings, her start comes back to the temperance movement in the middle of the 19th century, around the 1840s, 1850s. And at that time, life was pretty tough. The temperance movement, people couldn't drink the water, so therefore they was better because it wasn't sterile. So they tended to drink more alcohol. You drink more alcohol, you tended to get a bit fuzzy in the head, a bit maybe loose with your inhibitions. And ultimately, people said, we've got to have temperance because people are being sinful. In the same time frame, people were moving from the farms into the cities to get employment. Meat was slaughtered in the farms and moved into the cities, and it often came in rotten. So evils were seen of meat. And by a side issue is that meat was salted to try and make it last a bit longer. And we think this is the origins of where people think that salt is bad for them, because it got linked up with meat, salted meat, and the meat was actually off because there wasn't any refrigeration. And ultimately, this demonization of salt is totally irrational. The demonization of meat is totally irrational. But anyway, out of that temperance movement time, and Ellen G. White as a teenager started to believe in the Garden of Eden diet, which is roughly extrapolated into veganism now. But the Garden of Eden diet, to upset a whole lot of people living within the church, is actually a diet of fruits, nuts, and seeds. It's not a diet of vegetables. It's not even vegetarian. So the Garden of Eden diet is defined as fruit, nuts, and seeds. They get a bit liberal with their description of what fruit is, and so they can actually put wheat in there and rice. So it's essentially fruit, nuts, seeds, wheat, rice. Whoa, hang on, that is so nutritionally incomplete. You know, it doesn't have essential fats, essential proteins. It's got incomplete micronutrients, and all of this is high caloric and high in carbohydrate. Anyway, let's take the beliefs of the prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Ellen G. White, whose protege was John Harvey Kellogg, and he started, along with his brother William Keith, the breakfast cereal industry of the world. And the concept of breakfast is the most important meal of the day is a marketing term from Kellogg's and Co. The fact is, we've then got the development of breakfast cereals by John Harvey Kellogg was actually as a bland diet to quell our lustful thoughts and stop us from masturbation. And again, people will go, what? Like, it's all completely factual. I actually say to people, go on, when nobody's looking and nobody can see, Google masturbation and cereal, and guaranteed John Harvey Kellogg's name will come up there. And that was the birth of the entire cereal industry, and the birth of actually arguably that the bottom of that food pyramid with 6 to 11 servings of grain is actually born out of this concept. So anyway, John Harvey Kellogg had his beliefs, and we can talk about, Belinda's work goes into how he got those beliefs from Ellen G. White because of what he was writing and reading on her behalf. He was incredibly smart, incredibly influential. He developed the modern day hospital system that we all see, the multi-story, multiple groups in there. But he also developed breakfast cereal for this twisted belief. Now you've got to then realize that Lena Cooper worked for Kellogg's, and she took this edict, she took this message into the very first meeting and all of the textbooks for the next 30 to 40 years of the dietitians of the world, based around the Garden of Eden diet, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and able to bring in wheat and rice. It is essentially a fruitarian diet, which formed the basis of the textbooks for the beginning of dietetics education. If you get hold of her textbooks, and we've got a couple of copies back from the 1920s, they are essentially promoting vegetarian veganism. The words meat barely come into them. It's fascinating reading. Anyway, so therefore you've got the dietitians. Oh, sorry, here's the other one, a little clincher. At the very first meeting, with 4 or 5 weeks notice that they were going to form a group called the Dietitians Association, 5 food industry giants of the time were there sponsoring their meeting. So right at the beginning of dietetic education for the world was the food industry ready to manipulate and fund the Dietetics Association. And then you've got this religious ideology right there at the beginning, shaping the textbooks. And that has continued to this day. So they were there with the food industry, starting the journals of nutrition, the Dietetics Associations being heavily influenced by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The dietary guidelines for decades have had influence. We even have, at the last dietary guidelines review in the United States, was Joan Sabat, who was part of the group looking at fat, which essentially took on, said we can't have meat. If we look at and so Joan Sabat, he was the one who wrote the article in Religion, saying we're here to change the world and change the dietary guidelines. And they believe in this because essentially, as a core belief, is that when the vast majority, if not all of the planet, believe in veganism and believe in the Garden of Eden diet, then Christ is meant to return for the salvation of 144,000 people. And they honestly believe it. So when you think that the Adventist Church, they're not in it for the money, they're not in it for the fame, they're doing it for salvation. And that's become an incredibly powerful force. And we've been able to identify them at the Dietary Guidelines Committee, their influence in the United States. We've been able to identify them here in Australia. That influence continues at World Health Organization to this day. We've got multiple prime ministers and presidents within the Polynesian, the Eastern Pacific Islands, who are Seventh-day Adventists. They are a small church, but they've become incredibly powerful. They're the second biggest educator in the world after the Catholic Church. The Philippines has a major Catholic influence, but it's also got a major Adventist influence. You've got hospitals in the Philippines, which are just Adventist. They've been set up by the Adventist Church as outreaches, but they are there because medical evangelism is the right arm of the church. It's there to convert people across to Adventism and to a belief in a food pyramid which is not based on science. And the perils of that is now we've got a society which is fatter and sicker. You know, the more guidelines that have been put in the last 50 years, no matter which country, down that food pyramid pathway, we've seen that sicker and sicker. Here's a little one for you, the My Plate. Right? It doesn't even mention meat on it. It's the first time there's a food guideline which has no meat on it. It just has a section called protein. Scary.
Yeah, meat hours.
Pardon?
Hours, yeah. My Plate seems to be meat hours.
Yes, it's meat analogues. The very first person to develop meat analogues was John Harvey Kellogg. The Adventist Church effectively brought in, they effectively owned the cereal industry of the world. They started it. They started the meat analog industry. They brought in the Western soy industry. They brought that out of China and brought that into the United States and are able to get soy into infant formulas. They're incredible, and as I say, they're heavily financed, right into medical education and medical evangelism. And our children around the world are being developed, educated down this food pyramid with this anti-meat agenda, this pro-fruits and grains and nuts. And effectively, I don't know what the education system is in the Philippines, with children, but we've got, I've got grandchildren here who have got to have their fruit break. They've got to have they've got to have, breads and grains, and they're still being taught essentially the lines of the food pyramid. And the teachers don't want to speak out against it. But we have to, because it hasn't worked. So that's a long answer, and I know you never get a quick answer out of me. But the long answer is, if whatever we're doing is not right, and everyone believes that it is right, that's Einstein said, repeating stupidity doesn't work. So therefore, I need to work out why you believe in it. And now we've been able to trace that back. Belinda's work her talks on YouTube, just exceptional. It's all there in history. It's called, it's essentially a vegan fruitarian diet for society, and it doesn't work. And the more we get entrenched down that pathway, the sicker we're getting.
Yeah, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. From what you and Belinda have gathered through the years, what for you are the most influential factors that would be significantly impacting what we might call, as well as the improper human diet in today's modern society?
I think it boils down to the fact that we have to acknowledge that whatever we've been doing is not working. So the more we travel down the path of this sad diet, food pyramid, my plate concept, we're getting fatter and sicker. I know I keep repeating it. And I keep coming back to saying that's highly processed food in there. And I've written the diet, here's my concept of the dietary guidelines for everyone, no matter where you are. And I've put it in one sentence, and then you can do what you want with it. And that is, we should be eating food that is fresh, local, and seasonal, based on your culture and environment, avoiding added sugar and processed food. It's a very, very simple concept. And it makes sense. That's our ancestral diet, it's our evolutionary diet. Ken Berry calls it the proper human diet. It's literally how we evolved to be. We didn't have food miles. We couldn't get food from the other side of the planet. We couldn't process food. The very first times, datings of people, eating wheat and their molars, their back teeth were ground down to nothing. So we're not meant. So even the beginning of time, of the putting wheat and grain into our diet was associated with damage to our teeth. It needed to be processed and ground down. So, going forward is to understand that whatever we're doing now is wrong. Let's look back at the beneficial aspects of an ancestral evolutionary diet, recognizing that we can get access to that a lot easier now, because we don't have to go out and hunt and gather for it. We can go down, but by eating fresh, local, or seasonal, we can be supporting our local community, our local farmers, avoiding the transport miles, having some benefits from a environmental aspect as well. So again, to me, it's the science and the basics of all this is so simple. My question is, why is it not being adopted? And so, we've talked about the vested interest which have been shaping our guidelines, and the political, economic, religious, ideological ones which have been shaping our guidelines. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about what's the biggest block for healthcare professionals, doctors, dietitians, nurses across the board from adopting this. And the biggest block, in my belief, is you have to admit that you got it wrong. And then you have to say, I'm sorry. And I got it wrong. I got my medical education failed me in teaching me what biochemistry actually functionally meant. And sure, we learn the Krebs cycle in first year medicine, and then we forget it. And then we start believing the propaganda that comes through the rest of our medical education. Veganism's good, vegetarianism's good, grains are good, have your food pyramid, food plate, and whatever. It's absolute non-science. Or I misspell non-science and call it nonsense. It's very, very similar. So, we've apologized. Linda and I have apologized to our children. We're sorry. Mum and Dad are sorry we got it wrong with the way we fed you. But this is why we think we should move forward now. And it's really interesting seeing our grandchildren being raised differently with better food, wholesome food. They do have a bit of fruit, but nonetheless, we think, and they're great. All I can say that N equals 2 experiment is that they're healthy. I think they're fabulous, but nonetheless, it's not harming them. And that's the whole thing about this. When you move towards this proper human diet, ancestral diet, low carb, healthy fat, keto, whichever way you want to travel that path, even carnivore, you are seeing people getting healthier and healthier. So my recommendation to all healthcare professionals is don't be afraid to say, I got it wrong. And then don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry. And definitely don't be afraid to say, move ahead. And that's what we do with our children. You know, if you have children and they make a mistake and they do the wrong thing, you say, admit you made a mistake. It's called basic parenting. Admit you made a mistake, say you're sorry, and let's move on. And medicine has not moved on in 100 years on this topic. It's only moved backwards. Because we just keep... Sorry?
Like, you sound like Professor Tim Noakes.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, the thing about, I'm sorry I got it wrong. Yeah, I remember Professor Tim Noakes when you said that. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm better looking than Tim. There you are. This will get back to him one day. So
Okay.
that is the only bad thing about low carb. Okay, it improves everything in life, but I'm still ugly. So so no guarantees there.
Okay, so we are medical professionals. We're doctors, and aside from us, those who are significantly influencing the lifestyle, the dietary patterns of people worldwide does not just involve us, but also other medical professionals. Like, more importantly, in terms of dietary guidelines, we're talking about the nutritionists, the dietitians, right? So how do you think, from your point of view, how do you think should we medical professionals, as doctors, and also more importantly, the dietitians and nutritionists, the whole world over, how do you think could we effectively address this colossal error in our global dietary guidelines, so that eventually, in my own words, we can eventually reverse and fight and reverse metabolic syndrome?
But I think there's a top-down approach and there's a bottom-up approach, and I think we do need to be, as healthcare professionals, once another term I use is, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And if you actually, we just have to keep lobbying at every single level, lobbying government, lobbying guidelines, and just keep calling it out for what it is. We've just had a huge win here in Australia where therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, low carb, is now being seen as a best practice in the management of diabetes. I can't tell you how much work's gone into that, but that's a top-down approach. But once it's in, then that becomes the guideline, which the dietitians and the nutritionists and the doctors have to actually prescribe. The other one is bottom up, which is what we've all been doing for decades now, is actually talking about it. People with lived experience actually doing it. Myself, yourself, we feel better. We've got better health for ourselves, and then it's better health for our patients, and it's better health for the community. And so those people take their own stories forward. And therefore, that's what the bottom-up approach is. That's the use of social media. In Australia, we actually there are low-carb cookbooks put out. We have low-carb beer. We've got several brands of low-carb beer. I don't know, have you got low-carb beer in the Philippines yet?
Yeah, it's called light beer.
Yeah, well, so we've got light beer, but we've actually got low-carb light beer. So I say we're already winning at a bottom-up approach, because the market, the beer producers, are producing it because it's worth money to them. So I think it's up. But the most important thing is, as healthcare professionals, don't be afraid to just stop prescribing that food, the food plate and the food pyramid, and don't be afraid to go forward. There are many nutritionists and dietitians now around the world who are actually understanding that their education was just as tainted as mine. And I've gotten hold of not just the new dietetics textbooks from the 1920s, we've got the ones that they're currently using. and they're actually being sponsored by the food industry. They don't talk about meat. They are pretty well alternate meat. They're pretty well plant-based. These are the textbooks that the poor students are having to read and be examined on, but they don't need to practice it. And I know many, many dietitians now who have actually gone, actually, my education was wrong. And just like me, they've said, my education was wrong. And so therefore, re-educate yourself, but base it on around basic biochemistry. And then you'll see the benefits for yourself, your patients, your community, and it will restore what Belinda calls, it restores the joy of medicine. Because most of us for decades have just what I call, use another one of Belinda's terms, band-aiding sick care. Go to work, just band-aid one patient to the next, give them another drug, give them an operation, whatever. But the root cause is what fuel they've taken in. And if you can address that, gosh, the benefits are amazing. And that's what we were all seeing. That's why we took, people say, there's no vested interest here. The more I shout out about it, the more trouble I used to get into. But I haven't gotten into trouble with the medical board for several years now. Mainly because I'm right and it's helping people. I'm not being arrogant about that. This is the right thing to do. And I sleep well at night knowing we're doing the right thing. And that's what I encourage everyone at the conference to do. Just do the right thing, because in your heart, you know it's the right thing.
So little by little, medical professionals would eventually get to awaken when they see it for themselves and they try it out for themselves, how to improve their own metabolic health. So there's, yeah.
I'll quote Tim Noakes again now. Tim made a bold statement a couple of years ago now, but I completely agree with him. If you are a doctor and you don't understand the pros and cons of low carb, particularly in the management of diabetes, then you are negligent. That's it. It's as simple as that. This topic's been around for over 10 years now, and it's now mainstream. And as I say, we've got it in the guidelines. And if you don't understand it as a doctor, then I think you're negligent. And if you're not prescribing it, you are doubly negligent, because it's so basic to the improvement of the health of the population. So they're strong words, but I'm in complete agreement with Tim on that one. And that's...
Yeah, and I gather that you're part of that new ketogenic textbook.
I was very proud to contribute to that.
Yeah, so it's little by little becoming mainstream already. The ketogenic diet itself has its own medical textbook. So with that, to all of our audience here, the International Low Carb Awareness Week for 2023. If you want to know more about Gary, you can Google him and watch all the video presentations that comes out of his talks, as well as that of his wife, Belinda, and as well as the interviews that can be found in YouTube. And you can learn more about Gary and Belinda Fetke's advocacies at their websites, which are other nofructose.com and isupportgary.com. Did I get that right? Yeah,
that's correct. Sounds a bit corny, but that Belinda launched that website with a whole lot of science on it in supporting me in my struggles with the medical board. But the good news, at the end of 5 years of struggle and a significant personal financial cost, I was exonerated on all charges and given an apology. And it was in the same time frame that Tim Noakes had all of his charges dropped as well. And so they're important cases, because that meant that you, as a healthcare professional, can go forward and prescribe this, because it works, it's safe, it's effective, and it's the most powerful tool we've got in our bag to restore the joy of medicine. And that it just improves. People. It's fun making people get better. That's why we started medicine, isn't it?
Yeah, and truly healing. The art of healing.
No, it should be the art of prevention. Oh, here's a final note for you. What does doctor mean in Latin? So don't feel bad. Most doctors don't know the answer. The meaning of doctor is to teach. It's not to care for, it's not to educate, it's not to operate, it's not to make money, it's not to do anything apart from to teach. That's why you get a doctorate. So if we can teach our patients back to a road to health, then that's when we're fulfilling our role as doctors.
Okay. So you can also follow Gary in Twitter, right? With his handle at fructose no. Okay. So
There's not many Fetkes around, so you can find us on.
Yeah,
you can find us on Twitter and Instagram and things like that. But most of the talks, important stuff, is on YouTube.
So I think with that, thank you very much for joining us here in this International Low Carb Awareness Week.
My pleasure.
Gary, this is primarily meant for Filipinos everywhere, but this is also welcome for a global audience. So more power to you and to the entire low carb, healthy fats global advocacy. Thank you.
Well, I think you and everyone, as I said, the cogs in the wheel and making a difference, and that's a good thing to be part of.
And again, I salute you.
That'd be silly.